Good evening. I'm Sue Boyer, president of the Friends of the Oak Park Conservatory, and I'm taking the place of Judy Clem tonight. She had another obligation. And Casey Nikoloff and I are here to help you welcome you to our Learn and Grow lecture on container gardening. We're going to ask you to stay muted and to also turn off your videos so that it makes it a little less disturbing in terms of our video. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a little bit of an introduction here, and we'll go right into our presentation. As part of the Friends mission, we want to help educate and inspire gardeners to become more confident in their endeavors. Tonight, we feature the second of our three-week series called Learn and Grow. Our gardening experts will help you to prepare for the growing season and highlight plants available in the 35th annual plant sale. Next week, we will be hearing a lecture on pest management for veggies. Our 35th annual plant sale is now open to members and will open to the public on April 14th. We have a wide variety of annuals and edibles. I know some of you have helped to grow them there. I know Patty's staff has too. A good deal of help there to us. And some are now now new ones are featured this year as well. And you can learn more about that on our website at fopcon.org. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce our special guest this evening. You may know of Patti Staley from your visits to the conservatory. Patti is the Director of Horticulture and Conservatory Operations for the Park District of Oak Park. She holds a bachelor's degree in plant and soil science from Southern Illinois University and has worked in the green industry for 25 years. She doesn't look old enough to do that. Since she has held positions in various parts from private and public landscape design projects, nursery management and plant propagation. Her passion is creating beautiful functional spaces and connecting people with what she loves the most, plants. So we will go ahead and start. Patti, it's all yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. I got multiple screens, so I'm going to start by sharing my screen. And if you could give me a thumbs up when you see some pretty planters. I think I'm good.
Oh,
all right. So I understand you all can hear me, but I can't hear you very well. So we are going to utilize the chat tonight. I have about 17 slides I'm going to get through. I'm going to get through them rather quickly because I do want to leave some time at the end for some Q&A and some discussion. But I'm excited to start talking about container gardening. We've got spring that's crept our way finally, and I hear, fingers crossed, it's here to stay. So let's just get started and dive into container gardening. Here we go. So the art of container gardening. Container gardening is, it's pretty much like gardening that you do in your own home landscapes, except it's on a magnifying scale. Oftentimes it's in a condensed space with containers, raised beds. There seems like there's a secret art to it, but really a few key principles you can keep in mind can really help you achieve what you're hoping to get out of the end result. I know a lot of people get overwhelmed with picking the right plants for their containers, putting the combinations together. They think it's some type of a secret club that you have to have an eye for. But if you do follow kind of a recipe for putting your containers together, then let loose a little, you can really turn out some beautiful containers. So the 4 key elements we're going to cover this evening with container gardening is number 1, container selection. Number 2, planting media, so what you're growing your plants in. Plant selection, which everyone is most excited about. And then the care of your containers. So the picture we have here is of a very good gardening friend of mine. She puts hundreds of containers together every year. You can't even see the containers by the end of summer. So we're going to talk about how you can achieve that kind of look if that's what you're going for, and how to put such spectacular combinations together. So containers, I'm curious, you can, if you're on video, you can raise your hand. How many of you put the cart before the horse? Do you shop for your plants first? Or do you shop for your plants based on what containers you have? So some people go crazy this time of year. And as we get into spring, just shopping and buying plants and not really thinking about where they're going to go. Others I find are a different side of the mind, and they think about their containers. They think about what they're going to put in them, how many plants they need, and they shop that way. So there really is no right or wrong to it. It's just a different approach that I've learned over the years. People have two different mindsets. They either have it planned out on a piece of paper when they go shopping, or they just go crazy. So containers, one thing that you want to consider, whether you're one that, plans out what you're going to put in a container, or whether you buy the plants and then bring them home and then you've got to figure out containers and maybe purchase containers, is there certain things that you want to look for with a container? The most important thing with any container is you want to make sure that it has adequate drainage. So you need to select pots that either have already built-in drainage holes to them, or if you're using an untraditional container, you need to put drainage holes in the bottom of the pot. I've had many people ask me over the years, should I use drainage stone in the bottom of my container? There is no yes or no to that. It depends on many factors. I have some diagrams. One down here at the bottom will show you kind of what happens when you do add a layer of gravel to your container. If you add that layer of pea gravel or whatnot to the container, you push the water table for your container up. So it's giving less volume for your plants before they hit that too wet soil. Is that right or wrong? It really depends on how large of a container. If it's a really big container, you've got plants that maybe are more moisture loving, might be a good idea to push that water table up. If you have a more shallow container and you have plants that maybe aren't real water loving, you don't want to push that water table up by adding gravel to the bottom. The best way to provide drainage is to let that water, freely flow through the bottom of your container, and then use the right type of soil media that's going to provide drainage throughout the whole container. So we'll talk a little bit about media a few slides down. So that's just something to keep in mind. Adequate drainage, number one, when picking your container. Container size too. So this is really going to depend on the size and vigor of the plants that you're growing. It affects how many you put into a container, the height of the plant, what's the overall end height of the plant that it's going to get is really going to dictate the size of container you use. Right plant, right pot. So picking the wrong pot for the type of plant you're growing can be an issue if you don't adapt your water style. So for instance, if you're growing a lot of plants that really like it on the dry side, using a clay or natural stone pot is ideal. If you love plants that are more water loving, you might want to stay away from more of the terracotta, the clay, and the natural stone containers. Color and size of your container. So pay attention to the color, the shape of the container. It's really going to dictate the number of plants per container you use. Again, I mentioned already the size the plants are going to get, their height, All of that's really important. And types of containers, as you know, are endless. Clay, concrete, wood, resin. You can repurpose items and make them into containers. The number one mistake that I see people make with their containers is getting the right size container, the height for the plant. So you'll see through my X's, the one in the top right, you have this great big grass that is too big for that small container. In fact, I'm going to assume at the end of the season, when that person tries to take that grass and those plants out of that container, it's going to be fairly difficult. They're going to be pretty root bound. There's a lot of plants going on there. The container is now top heavy because your plant is much larger, much taller than the container. And then you have the opposite going, the picture below, those tall, white, vertical containers. All you see is container. And that's not necessarily what you want. You want there to be a balance. The rule of thumb is generally 1.5 times the height of your container is what your plant should be. So that bottom right picture where they have all those cute little succulents, definitely not appropriate for that size of container, because your eye is going directly to the container and not the plants. On the opposite of those pictures, my little smiley faces show where they did it right. So the black container at the bottom, that feels more comfortable, more appropriate for that size of container. The cactus and the ferns in the top left, again, the little container has the shorter fern. We have built up with a bird's nest fern and then a taller cactus. It's a strange combination of plants, the ferns and the cactus, but I think the picture serves the purpose of what I'm trying to get at. So again, this is the number one mistake I see people make, is just the height of the plants they're using versus the container size. Container options, like I mentioned, they're endless. I actually found this picture in the bottom left of the canoe today on Facebook. Someone had posted. They took an old canoe, drilled some holes in the bottom and made a container out of it. So like I said, the options are endless. You can have fun with it. You can go more traditional. We have a cute little metal truck in the back that sometimes we plant and fill in. So it can really reflect your personality. Grouping containers together, that is a completely total different art to master. Don't let it overwhelm you. I think this is the fun part of container gardening. A lot of times we're getting, and you're seeing, we're getting away from the traditional, 2 urns, and we're starting to group more containers together. The varying size and heights, taller ones in the back is important. Choose a few large statement pieces when you're doing container grouping, and then repeating a common thread through your containers, whether it's a color, whether it's a plant, some type of a common thread to tie in the containers together. The one in the top left, where I have an X, that didn't hit the mark. They have 3 very similar silver containers that are all the same height. And then this bright blue one, it just doesn't fit. Some varying heights, similar textures. The picture below it, we're getting closer. The one that is a lighter gray stands out a little bit too harsh to me. I would have liked to see possibly a few other lighter color gray planters in there. But again, they're getting closer. In the top right, this picture here, I like what they've done here. It looks like they've utilized what they've had on hand. For smaller containers holding single plants and larger containers, you definitely can use stones or pedestals if you don't have the right heights to raise your containers up. The goal is just to be able to see kind of what's going on from back to front. Filling your container. So good soil is the key to successful gardening, whether you're doing it in the home landscape or whether you're doing it in the container. It's more critical, I would say, in a container because you have a very restricted growing environment. So I tell people, resist that urge to buy inexpensive potting soil. Avoid soils that don't list the ingredients. Look for a good quality soil that lists, good drainage materials in it, has plant nutrients in it, has some type of ability possibly to retain moisture during dry spells. You're using a soil that is a sterile soil. It's free of weeds, disease, and pathogens. So never use soil directly from your garden. It's generally has weed seed in it, some type of disease and pathogens possibly, and it is not providing good drainage for your plants because it is very compacted. Potting soil versus a potting mix. What's the difference? I think those words are really used interchangeably. And potting mix is really something that is going to provide good drainage, has some type of, whether it's vermiculite or perlite, something in it that's going to provide some good drainage. Another question I get commonly is reusing potting soil from year to year. And, there's not a yes or no to this. It really depends. If it's a smaller container, go ahead and empty it out, fill new soil in it. If it's a larger container where those roots are maybe not reaching the bottom of the pot, general rule of thumb is, leave a third of the old soil and at the bottom and add new soil to the top. It doesn't hurt to add new soil every year. And if you can do it, I would encourage you to do it. But not, I definitely have reused potting soil with some of my larger containers, more for the fact that I've run out and I've wanted to get things planted up. So tried to use what I've had on hand. Problems with peat moss, I did want to kind of touch on this a little bit because almost all of the potted plants you are buying and almost all of the soil that you are buying, the potting soil, does contain some type of peat moss. Most bag potting soils contain it as well. This is definitely something that I would say has given this industry a black X for sustainability because the harvesting of the peat is not sustainable. So peat has many benefits to plants. That's why it's been used for years and years and years. It helps retain moisture, especially in a potting soil. Most of the peat that we actually use in the US comes from the peat bogs in northern Canada. And if you kind of remember kind of Canadian peat moss, definitely it was something my mother always used. She would always top dress her beds with Canadian peat moss. So how peat moss is produced is as the sphagnum dies in these bogs, it slowly decays over a long period of time. It turns into peat, and that is what is harvested. So why should we care? Well, peat forms really slowly in these wetlands. These wetlands are carbon sinks, and due to the massive amount of carbon they store, that's a good thing for us. That's a good thing for the earth. So when the peat is harvested, the carbon dioxide is released, and the carbon dioxide that's released has a significant contribution to climate change. It takes thousands of years for this peat to regenerate. It's something that's not, readily renewable. So, I think we're making a lot of good strides. We attended a few months back, a soil conference with our soil supplier here at the conservatory. There's a lot of great science going into new alternatives to peat moss. Coconut coir, we actually use a coconut coir blend in the soil that we use for growing the plants for the plant sale. Some soil makers are using recycled fibers, you're using compost. Just trying to get that right balance because peat does have so many great benefits for plants. So plant selection, the fun thing we all want to talk about, this is where people just, kind of throw up their hands, they, start shopping and, they maybe see one thing and they pick up another, and then they get home and they're like, how do I put this all together? So a lot of you may have heard of the terms thriller, filler, and spiller. It's something that's been around a little while. Proven winners have coined those three terms. And it's really only one of many ways to combine plants, but it's a really good starting point for you. So just understanding what those three things are, and then what type of plants fit into those categories. So thriller is going to be, your larger foliage or flowering plants. Examples would be like this palm in the top right corner, things like larger coleuses, taller grasses, but it doesn't even necessarily have to be anything real great and big. It's just something that's going to provide that focal point. So it could be as simple as something as like an angelonia or a salvia, something that's going to be a little beefier. Generally, it's going to be taller, and it's either going to be put in the center or in the back of your container. Fillers tend to be more rounded, like the New Guinea impatient in that picture, more of the roundy moundy type plants that fill in the middle ground. They make the planter look full, and they're generally placed in the front or surrounding the filler, depending on your plant arrangement in your containers. So examples like that would be like the New Guinea impatient, lantanas, euphorbias, smaller coleuses. Options are really endless for fillers. And then spillers are those that spill over your container, like that chartreuse creeping Jenny in that photo. They're generally placed in the sides or in the front of the container to spill over the edges. Examples would be Ipomea, Bacopa, Alternathera. Petunias are a great one, Calibrachoe. Some different options. Even some lantanas, have that trailing habit. So you want to kind of understand when you're looking at a plant, what's its habit going to do? So when you get kind of those three things figured out for your container, then you want to look at, or at the same time, look at color selection. And it's always helpful to have, if you're not a visual color person, to have a color wheel on hand. And there's really three ways I feel like you can attack colors and be successful at it. You can, have a monocolor design where you're sticking with maybe more of the different shades of blues and violets. Or maybe you have colors that, are next to each other on the color wheel, like the reds and the oranges and the yellows. This picture, to the right here with, the pansies, and I think that looks like some type of an ornamental pepper with it. So things that are next to each other on the color wheel. Complementary colors as well. So, mixing those blues and violets with the oranges. So whatever's across from each other on the color wheel. Plant texture is just as important as color. And I think this is where, the breeding of plants in this industry has really gone crazy with the options for different plant textures. So it's really the size and shape of the surface of the leaf. Leaves can be hairy, they can be smooth, can be crinkly. When you think about texture, you want to have a good balance in your container. That's another common mistake I see people make is they have too many coarse textured plants. They don't have any fine textured mixed in, or they have too many fine textured and it looks too busy. So a fine texture plant really gives a lot of light and airy feeling. And you can see that in the container picture here, where there is, I believe it's like a Hakone grass or a carex grass that's just peppered in to those containers, because there's a lot of coarse plants going on in there with the heuchera and the sedums. The coarse texture plants do give that more heavier tropical feel. So the bottom picture at the right, you've got the Sansevieria that's very striking. But then you have the Diachondra Silver Falls that just lightens it up. So good combination of those two in your container. So plant placement, I put this slide together and I was like, oh, this slide just, I would be overwhelmed by it. So I'm going to try to talk you through it because I do think this is helpful to some people when they don't know, okay, I've got the size of a container, how many plants, but how do I arrange those? So, before you start arranging your plants, after you've selected a good color palette, you select some good textures, you've thought about your container height and what size the plants are going to get. You want to leave at least an inch of, I refer to it as head space from the top of the container to where the soil is in the container. So don't overfill your container with potting soil. It kind of helps with water retention, helps as things get rooted in so that when you're watering, the water's not overflowing your container. And then when you start arranging plants, you definitely want to leave some room between the root masses. So if you have like a 4-inch plant you're taking out of a container, that root mass, you're not putting it root mass to root mass in the container next to the other plants. You're leaving a little space for those roots to kind of reach out and grow. You don't want to overfill your containers. You can still plant your containers so that in a few weeks they look full. So don't overfill the containers with plants. Plant placement really depends on the size and shape of the container and the number of plants you're using. So for instance, I have a round container. I've got 3 plants. In the top diagram, you're going to place them in a triangle pattern. In a rectangle container, you're going to do them in a line. So you can kind of see the different number of plants marked by A and how you're going to arrange those on the different size containers. I think it's most helpful, a general rule of thumb, figuring out the number of plants that you need is if you have a container that's 10 to 12 inches, you're typically going to need 3 to 4 plants. A container that's 14 to 16 inches, 4 to 6 plants, and then 16 to 20 inches, 6 to 8 plants. Again, that can totally change if you're using something really large, like a large tropical, such as an elephant ear or a hibiscus. Maybe you're going to cut back the number of plants because that one is going to take much more volume in your container. But general rule of thumb, number of plants per size container, I think can be a helpful thing. So caring for your containers, the top mistakes that I see people make is they forget to water. In the landscape, in the home garden, most people have more of a problem with overwatering, but in containers, it's more underwatering. So general rule of thumb is to check your containers daily. I know this is difficult in the summertime when we start maybe going on summer vacations or whatnot. Find a good neighbor, find a, high school student, have them come check those containers while you're out of town. Take your vacation maybe towards the end of summer when you're ready to transition. I have a hard time in the summer leaving my containers when we go on vacation, and I generally do have a plant babysitter that takes care of them. You've invested so much in those containers. 1 week really in the heat of summer, you can lose that investment. Combining sun and shade plants. So, birds of a feather flock together. Look at the light conditions of the plants. Don't be putting shade plants with sun plants. I did experiment last year. I had a large container. I had no plants left, to fill this last container I had to do. It was in the shade. I needed something kind of a spiller. So I did a chartreuse ipomoea in it. And that thing just got so leggy. So, you have to kind of adapt sometimes, but you want to look at combining the right type of plant requirements together. Starving your plants, so you need to feed them a meal. Liquid fertilizer every 10 days is typically what I do. Whether you buy a fertilizer or a soil with a slow release in it, still give them that extra oomph of a liquid fertilizer. Exposing plants to, well, that's supposed to be not wide, that's supposed to be wind, is also a mistake. So hanging baskets, if you've got a very windy balcony or whatnot, hanging baskets, you want to protect them a little bit more from the wind. Removing faded flowers and just giving a haircut is important to sprout new growth periodically. Just keeping the containers clean so that they're not harboring any insects or disease with old spent flowers or leaves. And then know when it's time to say goodbye. A lot of times, these containers, they're one season. So know when the plants have outgrown the container and it's time to either transplant them or it's time, to redo the containers maybe for fall. I use a lot of perennials in my container, and I do tend to take those out before we get too late in the fall and replant those in the garden. Just a quick guide, just some additional tips. Use proper soil. We covered that. Ensure the pots have good drainage. Use thriller, filler, and spillers. Combine plants of varying heights and colors and textures. But one thing we didn't talk about is tie in the architecture features of your home. That's really important. So where are these containers going? How big is your house? So you can see the house on the right. It's a pretty massively big house. So you want to use some big containers so it balances the height of your entrance. Choose interesting pots to reflect your style. Fertilize often and water often. So we're nearing kind of the end of my slides. I moved through them pretty quickly, so I'm hoping you guys have a lot of good questions for me, but I did want to highlight some of my plant favorites from the sale. I think these are underutilized plants. They are excellent though for containers and in the garden, and some of them are maybe a little surprising to people. The first one in the top left is Swiss chards. And Swiss chards, you don't think about using it in container, but it's a nice kind of thriller in your container. It's edible and it adds a lot of color to your container. The plant next to it is a sage. I'm forgetting the name of that sage. I think it's like a tricolor sage. So that's a great filler in your container, and it looks great all season, all the way through frost. The light green pitcher, I used this the first time a few years ago in my container. It is lemon verbena, and I loved what it brought to my container. It was just a nice light and airy plant, and I just loved being able to just kind of walk up to my container, touch the leaves, and have that smell. So, herbs, vegetables, certainly you can use them in a container. The picture next to it is a kale that we have available at the plant sale, and I'm forgetting the name of it. Red bar, I believe, is what it is. It starts out a lighter green, and then as it enters in the fall, it turns purple. I think it's pretty to plant from the get-go in the spring and carry it through fall in your container. It's just an interesting texture to it. New Guinea and Patience are a great container plant, and they really kind of fill in a container. A lot of the newer varieties are adaptable to sun or shade. There are quite a few that can really take both. So if you're kind of one of those people that, I have container that, I don't know, it gets sun in the morning, but then it's shade all day and you're really not sure which way to go. New Guineas are pretty fail-proof for that. The bottom left is Evolvus, blew my mind. You do not see this plant very often. It's one we've had in the plant sale for several years now. It is one of the true blue flowered plants, and there's not many plants that are just really a true blue color. It's more of a spiller, likes it dry, and I just love that blue color. I think, when you're a plant fanatic and you love plants, being able to find a true blue variety plant is something kind of rare. There's a peacefulness about that color blue. It's, more of a universal color that really does mix well with other colors. I'm going to mispronounce this next one. I believe it's Dorianthus. It's kind of a semi-succulent. This one also is available. Nice variegation to it, likes it dry. It's a great spiller. I love the little fuchsia flower it gets in the summer. Next to it is Bacopa. We have two Bacopas, a white one and a pink one. I love them both, but I love the little daintiness of this white Bacopa, but yet it does not stop blooming. It's one of those where I feel like, wow, it's so dainty and delicate looking, but it just keeps going in the summer. Zinnia, and I believe this is, oh gosh, it's the yellow zinnia that we have available, profusion yellow. We have a profusion yellow and a profusion cherry. I just love the yellowness of this. This is a very clean, creeping zinnia, a nice filler in your containers, doesn't get too large, and it just remains very clean. Some zinnias do get a powdery mildew. This one I have not seen get a powdery mildew and just keeps blooming nonstop. And then the last one is a verbena. And again, one of those that looks a little bit delicate, more of a spiller. And actually, no, that is not a verbena. That is a lantana. It looks a lot like a verbena. That one we had growing in our Mediterranean room for quite some time. Started to get really more like a woody shrub. It's just a nonstop performer as well. It kind of got too large for its space, and I just was waiting and waiting for it to stop flowering. I'm like, the thing is never going to stop flowering. We're going to have to take some cuttings and take it out, but a great plant for your container. So those are just some of my favorites from the sale that we have available that I think are great for containers. And I think that's going to conclude my slideshow. So I could have talked for hours on end about containers. I'm going to quit sharing my screen now so you can see me. Let's see here. And we'll move things over so I can kind of look at the chat and see if anyone has any questions. Hey, give me 1 second. I got multiple screens I'm working with. Okay. I'm trying to open the chat. See if we have any questions. Here we go. Let's get to the top. Great. So Catherine had a question about what plant nutrients are we looking for in the soil. So good question. A lot of the soils nowadays are being built with some type of a slow release or some type of nutrients in it. Additionally to that, what I add to my soil is it's Espoma, ESPOMA fertilizer. It's an organic fertilizer. It's called Plant Tone. That's a great one to add to your soil. Also, you know, some people have used Osmocote. That's a good one to add to your soil. I tend to go a little bit more organic, adding to the soil, and that's one I love. It's called Plant Tone. And I just add it initially when I'm filling my containers with the soil. I add that Plant Tone to it, even if the soil already comes with some type of nutrient or slow release in it. Then some type of a liquid feed. I'm not always good about the liquid feed. That's why I like to add that Plant Tone initially. I tend to add the Plant Tone then again, maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the season, just depending on how my containers are filling, what type of weather we've had. Liquid fertilizer, so that Plant Tone, and I promise I'm not a rep from that company. It's just one that a lot of gardeners that I know really like those products. They are you know, made in the USA. They are organic. There's different kinds depending on if you're container gardening versus vegetable gardening or in-ground. But they do make a liquid fertilizer as well. The liquid fertilizer, you're going to see more immediate results as opposed to like a granular where it needs to kind of break down. So if you know, you've got a party coming up in a couple of weeks, you want your containers nice and full. Liquid fertilizer is a really good choice. Okay. Let's see. Sweet potato vines. So someone asked about what about sweet potato vine? Yeah, you know, it's one of those that I feel like it's still a great choice. And we do have 2 sweet potato vines available for the sale. More sun for sure. There's so many great spiller choices, but sweet potato vine is an excellent spiller for a full sun container. Oh, there we go. What is your favorite potting soil? All right, I'm going to try to pull it up, what it is, and share that with you. And I've tried a lot of different potting soils over the years. Share my screen quickly once I get it opened. This one is called Pro Mix. I love this soil. I use it for seed starting. They have a seed starting variety. I'll share my screen quickly so you can see that. Let's see here. Okay, so this is the one that I prefer. Again, there's a lot of great potting soils out there. I've had the most success with this Pro Mix variety. It's mycoactive, so it has some mycorrhizae in it, which is great. Another one that I like, I haven't tried it, but I'm going to try to type it in and find it for you. Happy Frog potting soil. See if we can find that. Oh, look at even Target selling it. So it's from Fox Farm. Here we go. Happy Frog is another great potting soil. Organic. They have different different types depending on if you're, vegetable gardening, tropical growing, or whatnot. So those are my top 2. But there are, like I said, I'm going to stop sharing now. Here we go. There are a lot of great potting soils out there. Somebody asked, what is the difference between compost and fertilizer? So good question. Compost is generally an organic matter that breaks down over time and adds nutrients to your soil. Fertilizer can either be organic or it can be synthetic. And they also add more key elements to your soil. So you can kind of dial in on, do I need more magnesium? Do I need more phosphorus? What do I need my soil to do that it's not achieving? So yeah, that's the difference between compost and fertilizer. Compost, you can use compost in containers. We do vermiculture, or we have been doing vermiculture in the past, and worm composting, which doesn't produce a lot of compost. So I'm like, well, let's just use it in the containers. So you can do that. Yep, and someone mentioned you can find Happy Frog at Good Earth and River Forest. That's good to know. Next question, what container plants would you suggest for areas primarily in the shade? Okay, so yeah, shade. There are a good number of shade annuals out there. I mentioned the New Guineas can typically be adaptable to shade or sun. Begonias as well. I love begonias, the Dragon Wing series, the Santa Cruz begonias. Again, they're being bred now where they're adaptable to part sun or shade. Begonias are a great one. In my containers, I typically mix in some perennials in my shade containers. So maybe a big guacamole hosta for that thriller. Maybe some carrots, some native carrots for, that spiller. So don't be afraid to mix annuals and perennials, herbs, vegetables together to get your achieved desired results. I tend to get the most compliment for my containers where I have mixed in a perennial too, or a tropical or sedum or something like that. I'm gonna take a quick water break here and see if there's some more questions coming through. See if I missed any. Someone asked about the April 3rd lecture and if it's been uploaded to the website. We definitely will check that out and let you know.
It will be, Patty.
Great.
Yeah, sorry. It should be on by tomorrow, I think.
Okay, Grace asked about, will the plants I find fit in what I have? Then I may need to scale back. So I guess containers, but I'm always adding containers. So yeah, I am one of those people, Grace, where, oh, I can't resist. And maybe I've bought too many plants, add containers. Sometimes I'll have like a leftover coleus or a leftover something, and I'll add like a small container just to grow that plant, or I'll give it to a friend. But typically I'm adding containers because I just love them all and can't let them go. So, that one slide I showed you, the art of grouping the containers, I really think that's something that's kind of gaining in popular. Have fun container shopping, have fun kind of going through the garage. This is the good time right now. This is what I'm going to be doing this weekend. I'm going to be getting all my containers out. I'm going to be, if there's any soil left over them from the winter, I'll be emptying them. I'll be sanitizing them, cleaning them out, and then refilling them for some spring planters. So it's a good time. We had this talk because I'm going to give the go-ahead for pansies and sweet alyssum and snapdragons, and then you can blame me if we get snow again. Okay, I think I have answered everyone's question. No, look, two more. Let's get to those. We do have 10 minutes here. So one question is, how would you transition to fall plants? So yeah, if you can do that, that's great. Instead of starting all over, sometimes I think ahead with my containers, and I have certain color schemes maybe I like every year, and I know, okay, I'm going to use my my focal point plant is maybe going to be an ornamental grass that I'm going to leave in, but maybe I'm going to take out the summer, impatiens and angelonia and things that feel more tropical in summer to me. I'm going to pull those out, leave, the ornamental grass, and then I'm going to add in like fall pansies, fall kale, mums, the ornamental peppers. There's so much you can do. I think this is where it's really good to use perennials as well, because if you select a perennial that really can carry you through the fall, like a carex grass, I've mentioned that several times. I love using that one. You can do that. Sometimes though, your containers get really full of roots and you need to take out what you have, divide what you have in there, get rid of those summer annuals, but maybe leave the things that you can utilize, like that ornamental grass or that perennial or whatnot, with your fall plants. Best way to sanitize pots. Well, here at the conservatory, we use a product called Green Shield. And that's because we are growing in a controlled greenhouse environment where we have to be very careful of any pathogens or diseases or insects, eggs that might be harboring. We do reuse our containers here at the conservatory. Those plastic containers, we have an excellent pot washer that comes and volunteers and washes our pots, and we sanitize our pots before they go back in the greenhouse to use. At home, honestly, I use just a Dawn liquid soap just to wash out and clean my containers. Occasionally, I will use a white vinegar if I really have a lot of calcium buildup from the water hose or whatnot. You can do that as well. Okay, I believe I've gotten to everyone's questions. We've got 5 minutes to spare, but I appreciate all of you being here tonight. It's fun to talk about plants. It's fun to look forward to spring. If you haven't jumped on the PopCon plant sale, if you're a member and you can get on now, get on now. Make sure you've made your final kind of purchases before it opens up to the public. I believe this Saturday opens up to the public. There's a lot of great plants, and I was going to pull some from the greenhouse and bring them in here, but they're still smaller. We're timing them just right so that they'll be ready for your gardens, and they're cozy up in the greenhouse now.
Patty, there's one more question in the chat.
All right, let's see here. Oh, what would you plant in a natural fiber container liner? So you can really plant anything. Actually, I have expanded my vegetable gardening using some of those those natural fiber containers. So you really can grow anything in them. Just depends on, how big they are, how deep they are. I had a gardener friend that actually grew potatoes in them. So I tend to use them more for vegetable gardening than I do my ornamental container gardening, but not that you couldn't do it.
Anybody have any more questions that you want answered? It looks like this has been a great, informative program for us. And if you have future questions, let us know. Come on into the conservatory. We want to thank Patty for the time tonight and for all of her expertise. It's going to make us all better container planters.
Well, this was fun. Thank you all for joining in.